Okay, so we have hit the record button. All right, I'm gonna kick us off. And Nate, if you can just keep an eye on the waiting room while I do the introductions and let people in as they come, that would be great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this workshop today. Oh, and then the other thing, as you're letting people in, I have to, like, everyone's coming in unmuted. So if you can just help me make sure that there's not a lot of sound happening. And I will just say for the audience that I usually keep the Zoom webinar so that people come in muted. Today, that is not the case. We're going to mute you, but if you do need to say anything, feel free to unmute. But we will be keeping the questions for the end of the webinar. So just to introduce myself, welcome. This is our first of our Housing Committee workshop series as part of the Striving for Equity project. If you're here, you probably know me. I see a lot of familiar names and faces, and I'm really excited to see some new folks as well. I am Corinne. I am part of the housing advocacy programs, and I am kind of leading the Striving for Equity project this year. This is a new project that we've hosted, that we're hosting at CVOEO's Fair Housing Project. And its purpose is to support housing committees and housing groups of community housing groups, housing commissions, any kind of group that's working towards regional housing goals in their community. We've done a lot of work with housing committees in the past, and this just really allows us to broaden our capacity and start fabricating tools that facilitate and support housing committee work. So one of the things that we're doing as part of that is we're doing a workshop series. Every other month, we'll be hosting a workshop on topics that we have heard from you that would be helpful to your work. One of the things we've heard about a few times is the housing data website. I know that Nate has been, I'm here with Nate Natieri from Vermont Housing and Finance Agency, who will be leading this webinar. And I know that Nate has been doing some updates to the housing data website that would be great to share with us. But before we get into that, I just want to share a few things. One is that we are continuing to ask for housing committee members and housing groups to participate in our survey. So I'll be putting that survey link in the chat. Also, in the meantime, I know people were still joining when I said this. If you have the capacity and you're willing to share, it's really great to know who's in the room with us today, where they're calling from. So if there's a housing group or housing committee you're part of, or just a town and a community, we'd love to hear that. And then I, of course, understand that many of us are joining from our places of work, and so no pressure. And so the things I want to share, I'm putting in our housing survey. So if you are a committee member or a community member that's working housing needs in your town, we'd love to hear from you in this survey, and it's helping shape what this Striving for Equity project is. So for instance, this survey has helped us develop some of the programming that we've put together. And so it's another survey, but it's short and it really helps inform our work. Some of you might have filled it out already, so you don't have to fill it out again. Some of you might be part of housing committees that someone else has filled it out. It's still helpful to hear from other people, but it's just helpful to get as many responses as we can. The other thing I just wanted to share is that we continue to have fall programming, and we have the next kind of thing in our schedule is our monthly housing committee drop-in. So this is like a new kind of opportunity that we are using to connect housing committee members to each other. Every month we're hosting a space for housing committee members to come join us and talk about you know, what they're working on, what the challenges are that they're seeing, share resources with each other. So last month we had a housing committee drop-in session where we talked a lot about housing trust funds. A few housing committees are starting some housing trust funds. A few are troubleshooting housing trust fund being used the most efficiently. It was a really great opportunity for you know, housing committee members to share what they're learning by doing. And there's only so many kind of like documents and like step-by-step processes that we can share, that there's only so much that can teach us. There's a lot that we learn from each other just in conversation. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll be reposting these links during Nate's presentation, but the Google Doc link just for that, just put it in the chat. That's going to show you our fall programming, so you can see what's coming up next. Most importantly, or not most importantly, but the piece I wanted to highlight is that on November 16th, we'll be doing our next housing committee drop-in. If you have a subject that you'd like to introduce, feel free to just come and share your updates for the month, your updates for the season, any successes. So that's November 16th from 5:30 to 6:30. Again, I'll be putting all this information in the chat. And the other thing I just wanted to say, it's a helpful resource that some of you might be interested in is if you didn't know already, Vermont Housing Finance Agency, I've been doing some forums and listening sessions on development funding. I apologize for that. I'm gonna, it's recorded and it's a really helpful resource, and put it in the chat. I just started listening to it today, but I already am learning a lot from it. Okay, so without further ado, Nate, I think it's time for me to pass the mic to you. If you just want to go ahead and reintroduce yourself. In the meantime, I'm gonna highlight you for speaker view and put kind of organize those resources in the chat. And then, of course, feel free, folks, if you wanted to keep adding your names, where you're from. It's nice, no pressure, and officially muting myself and giving it to you, Nate.
All right. Thanks, Corinne. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. Happy November. It's pretty nuts. My name is Nate Lantieri. I work with Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and I am the research coordinator over at VHFA. I've been in the, oh, wow, now I'm big on my screen. I change that because that is distracting. But that's all right. I've got two screens, so I'll just make that one small. All right. Anyway, so my name is Nate Lantieri. I'm the research coordinator at VHFA, and my presentation today is going to be a little bit about our resource housingdata.org, which I'll actually ask Corinne to toss in the chat, but I'll be sharing my screen throughout it. So going to start just kind of a general introduction as to what the site is, what VHFA is, and how the site is part of our mission, and then you know, diving a little bit into some of the specifics of how to get around the site and what's within it, and then really just going to kind of open it up to Q&A. So with that, I'm going to just immediately share, well, actually, I'll start here. So, and just describing what VHFA is. So, you know, there's quite a few acronyms in this housing world, as I'm sure all of you know. And VHFA is just another one of them. But the secondary part of the finance agency component is really what the main purview of VHFA is. So the organization was founded in 1974. It is one of many state housing finance agencies. There's actually one in every state. Vermont has, as many as you may know, a quasi kind of governmental system where there are certain aspects of state legislation, federal legislation that are mandated, but then actually actualized by nonprofits that do statewide, countywide, regional work. And VHFA is one of those. So at that time in the 70s, there were some changes in the way that affordable housing was financed. And the federal government functionally said, in order to continue having our federal pass-through, you must have a housing finance agency. So that's really the origin of VHFA, and most of where its time and resources still go towards facilitating the financing and development of affordable housing in Vermont. So that kind of takes two general strategies. One of them is through the single family financing side of things, where our VHFA team works with qualified lenders, different credit unions and banks in Vermont to make sure that qualified borrowers, people who are looking to purchase their homes, typically first-time home buyers, but there are other programs, that have come online since, to facilitate getting the best kinds of interest rates and packages for those buyers. So through that, since the 70s, there have been about 30,000 first-time home buyers, or just home buyers in general, that have been facilitated by VHFA loans. The other side of things that we help finance are multifamily developments as well. So many, if not all of the larger, actually I can say all of the subsidized units of affordable housing that are part of multifamily developments that have been built since that time. The first multifamily development with VHFA involved was in 77. Those have been touched in some way, facilitated by the financing capabilities, as well as the leveraging abilities of VHFA. So 30,000 units of single family homes, 8,000 units additional of multifamily homes in that time. So, and hopefully that number will we know it will continue to keep growing, and hopefully that rate will keep getting faster, because, we know that we need a lot more homes in Vermont just generally right now to meet the demand that we already have. So where do I come into this? So I work on a website that's actually slightly different from the standard finance side of things. Part of VHFA's mission, beyond just this facilitation of the financing of housing, is to just generally support the betterment and development of high quality affordable housing for low and moderate income Vermonters. So in the early 2000s, kind of recognizing that there was an advocacy need for just high quality information about what even is going on in the state housing stock. Prior folks in my role as a research coordinator at VHFA created this website called housingdata.org. You can tell that they were forward thinking because they got just housingdata.org, not vermonthousingdata.org, not housingdata.org, VT, nothing like that. They just got it early. So, but the website that we have today is largely been in its current format since about 2018. That was when the last major update was conducted. And with that, I'm going to share the site, and I'll share my screen, and we can kind of just drive through this together a little bit, and then open it up to questions and go from there. So let's see, how do I share my screen? All right. Is that up? All right.
Yes.
So this is the landing page for housingdata.org. You may notice that it's a little bit jumbled right now. So I started this role as research coordinator back in March, and pretty much from that time, we've been in a state of just really trying to constantly update the site to make it a better, more usable, useful resource for Vermonters to just better understand what's going on with housing. So this view that you see right now is what it currently looks like if you're to go to housingdata.org. We are in the midst, though, of an actual site hosting upgrade too, to make it so that it's something more interactive and more responsive to different layouts. So things like mobile, different accessibility devices should be able to use the site better under the new site upgrade. But as many of you may know, site upgrades do often take a while. So we're in the midst of that process. I was hopeful that we would be at the next stage of this by this point, but we're going to keep moving forward. But generally, this is what the site will broadly look like if not some of the specifics changed. From here, you can kind of see that it's a little bit of a misnomer in the way that they're set up here, but there are really three aspects of housingdata.org. There is the community profile section, which is on the left and the bottom left, the housing ready toolbox, and then if you could imagine where it says renter FAQs, that would be our third section, which is called the directory of affordable rental housing. And that's actually featured up in this search bar. So I'm going to primarily focus on the first two, the community profiles and the housing ready toolbox today, and then very briefly on the directory of affordable rental housing. That is a slightly different side of the site, whereas the prior two are more related. So broadly, what each of these three categories are is that the community profiles is the data section. That's where the housing data side of things comes in. I'll dive into each of those a little bit more first. And then the housing ready toolbox is the section with, that's really our text section. It's the best practices, connections to other resources, this process where you could go from having no information about what a housing committee is to hopefully being able to get empowered and be able to start taking some steps. The specific resources that are in that housing ready toolbox section have changed over time and have they've grown, changed slightly, purview has shifted a little bit. So with these upgrades to trying to make that section a little bit more user-friendly and ideally, as it continues to grow, accessible and useful to more user types to better understand how they can affect change in their housing in their local community. So that's the housing ready toolbox. This third section is called the directory of affordable rental housing. We call it DORA. That's the acronym for it, but I don't think that's actually referenced anywhere on the site. But as I was referencing prior with VHFA's financing role in much of the affordable housing in Vermont, part of the requirements for developers, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit that are using VHFA funds, they must submit a registration to the directory as part of their qualification documents. So in doing that, we actually receive a record of every multifamily unit that uses subsidized funding in the state as they're built. Historically, and when the housing conditions in the state were a little bit different, we were also able to maintain updated vacancy records on those buildings as well, where each of the property managers was submitting current vacancy standards to display on the site what, where there were vacancies currently. But, considering how the vacancy rate has really shrunk in Vermont, and also the reliance on a really disparate network of managers to be accurately sending this information into us on a regular basis, led to us recently recognizing that the stating the vacancy numbers on each of those things was actually something that we couldn't maintain up to a reliable standard, so as to not suggest to potential renters, potential people looking for housing, that there may be vacancies at a place when there's actually not. So recognizing that flaw, we took down the vacancy standards to just, or not standards, vacancy rates to just say, this is where the units are. So broadly, those are the three categories of housing data: community profiles, housing ready toolbox, and the directory. With that, I'm going to go into the community profiles. And the first note I just want to point to is that here you'll notice that on these pages, the headings do actually line up with those three. So here you have DORA, community profiles, housing identity toolbox. So once you're in the community profiles, this is really the main data section of the site. And you're immediately greeted with just a landing page, really, that kind of tries to give a sampling of some of the data that's on the site. There are really two sections that kind of try to give a sampler just to kind of get your head around what's going on currently. And that's on this homepage and on the community snapshots. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but this is just a little bit of a sample of some of the things that are on the site. Number of households, number of homeless households, gross rents are by county, median year homes built, just a few different things. And I'll start with just a note on really where the data comes from. So in our role, other than through the directory, we at VHFA are not collecting these large data sets. It's pretty prohibitively difficult and cost expensive to actually be the ones creating these statewide analyses. So instead, we're just relying on high quality data sources that come from people, organizations, and a very small number of companies that collect high quality resources. So one of the greatest resources that we have on here is really just a refinement and revisualization of the results from the Census Bureau's work. So both the census and its subsidiary survey, the American Community Survey, are referenced in a lot of places on the site. So quick note on the American Community Survey, it's something that it's not, sometimes numbers can come through and they can be misinterpreted as to exactly what they mean. Every 10 years, the Census Bureau conducts a census that is a full count of every household in the country. It's incredibly cost prohibitive because they're trying to get one-to-one every household. In order to have a sense of the way that things are changing in those intervening 10 years, they conduct a smaller survey called the American Community Survey. And in order to reliably have numbers on this annual basis, they instead choose a sample size that is an estimate, but to be reflective of what the general population is in Vermont, and actually in the country. So in order to do that, the Census Bureau is only taking a 5% sample of any population, and then extrapolating that up to what they estimate as the current standards are in the state. One time I was shared this really useful expression, and that is that all models are made up and some models are useful. Whenever we're looking at these representations of these really complex things, these things that we know are changing daily, we can't necessarily expect that we're going to have 100% data fidelity of there were, say, on this example, exactly 271,890 households in Vermont. We can say within the bounds of reasonable estimates that there were about this many. And if we're following the same trend every year, we can still track that trend. So that's just a note on data. Anytime that you're seeing something that is a Census Bureau referenced table, chart, anything like that on this site, it inherently has that estimate cooked into it. If it's ending in around zero, if it's the 2020 numbers, if it's the 2010 numbers, anything prior to that, that's going to be an actual count. Anything that's year to year will have that estimate cooked into it. And that's featured as well on the visualizations. It shows what the margin of error and things like that are. That's pretty wonky, but it's something that does actually come up a lot in saying, well, how come these numbers change so drastically? It's because there is some estimating involved in that. And that's conducted at the federal level too, in how some of these things are conducted. So with that preamble, it's important because the census does feed much of the site, and really an important note of what the site is many of the sources that we use are publicly available. They are federal conducted, whether it be through the census, they are from the Department of Labor, they're from the Department of Taxes. They're resources that the federal government, state government is putting out and made available, but from just raw data numbers may be pretty hard to interpret. So really the point of the community profiles is to take that data, clean it up, and make it so that people can actually understand it. And we've broken it down to as many years as we have possible, and for every year that we have, to the lowest level of geography that we have too. So most of the metrics are available at the town level or can be broken to the county level as well. Some small ones are not. There are a few that the data is only broken down into like regions for the state. For example, we are working currently on trying to get the point in time count estimates out to give a sense of, broadly what is going on with the conditions of the homelessness in Vermont. But for this year's data, instead of getting it in counties, we only have it available by the AHS districts, which are very slightly different. They match up more through, this is pretty insider, but some of these things that do end up being like, oh, well, we only have it available at these non-county levels. So how do we work with it?
Hey, Nate,
So
can I just ask,
yeah,
can you describe what an AHS district is?
sure. Yeah. Well, that's something that it's as working with the different levels of geography in the state, you kind of realize that there's a few ways that you can kind of fit the puzzle pieces of the state together and it'll be a contiguous state. So one way that we could do that is by looking at counties. Another way from, if folks are familiar with the community action agencies, where CVOEO, for example, covers Chittenden, Addison, Franklin, and Grand Isle County. The AHS districts are another way of just grouping the state into a more functional pattern. So for that one, that one's really only applicable for homelessness because it's directly connected to the way that people are receiving care and accessing into the continuum of care. So instead of it being for this model, instead of it looking at what county people are receiving service, it's instead looking at what service provider they enter the continuum of care through. It's not ideal that we don't have it in the county level, but we can only work with what we get out sometimes. So, and that's just a note, and that's a note too on our updating procedures. In terms of actually the new data that's added, we really are trying to add in new years for information, prior years for information, pretty much on a continuous basis. So, I was talking about working on those PIT numbers right now, that there are, through there being 10 to 15 sources that are used on the site, it's a pretty continuous basis that one is in the process of being updated with New Year's data, just based on when it's available. So for example, we just recently updated our information on short-term rentals, just because that's when our analysis was completed, that we're good. We feel good that these are able to be published, and they were recently published. In December, we'll start the process of working on new Census Bureau data. That's the new American Community Survey will be updated. So it's good to always just keep checking back on the site as there may be new years of metrics added. Not as much historic years, but always be on the lookout for new years of data on the site. So it's kind of, yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
And I know we also want to go over the Housing Ready Toolkit, but just thinking about the data that people can access through this, what kind of things can they, can you give an example how maybe a housing committee or a regional housing group can utilize the data that they can access through?
Sure thing. Yeah. All right. So let's say we want to So like I was mentioning before, the home and the community snapshot, those are sort of, actually the community snapshot could be useful for a town. Community snapshot is somewhat of like a refinement of trying to capture many of the metrics within the site on one page. So for example, if we were thinking of the, I don't know, let's just say Bolton. Bolton has a housing committee that they're looking to start. And they want to get a sense of how some of their information compares to the state standards. So yeah, households, you don't really get a ton of information. You see the countywide figures, you're getting Chittenden County here. But as you're looking down, you see, okay, that's the first metric that is a major difference in between you know, the statewide number and the town number. So the snapshot is really, it's kind of just a jumping off point for some diving into some of the deeper statistics that are within the site. So then if say, all right, we want to look at that income number, let's get a better sense of what that looks like over time. We could say, let's go to income and employment. It's median household income we're looking at. There we go, median household income. So this is kind of what a standard page on housing data, the community profile side, looks like. The technical term for this is a viz or a visualization, view, whatever you might want to call it. This is kind of generally what the rest of the site will look like. So every viz is available on multiple years. So, all right, we're going to do just 2 census comparison years. So we're going to choose 2020 and, no, there's actually not 2010 for this one. So instead, we'll do 2021 and 2019. So that's how you can choose what years you want. And then by default, it'll always choose the statewide number. If you add in, and you can add in any town that you'd like, any county that you'd like as well. Sometimes there will be metrics to just cut things down by county. Sometimes it'll be to display the county depending on the way that the data is presented from the original source. And what was our example? Bolton. All right, so note there's like a little bit of a data note with that 2021 number for the Bolton renters, but by comparison, you can still see, all right, so okay, so it's broken, split down the middle. By and large, income is higher in Bolton for both renter and owners than with the granted note that the 2021 data is not available for the town versus the state. So say then you want to, all right, I really believe in these metrics and I think that I could use this information. A great resource here too is that you can download the data. And did the pop-up show up here, Corinne, where it says, okay. So from here, you can actually choose what format you'd like. I would say that data is probably going to be your most useful one. The image could just, would just be a literal image of what's on the screen now. But, and now is it showing a spreadsheet? Yes. And then this is just what the source data looks like. So you can actually pull it directly from the viz, and that's actually true for any page on the site. The data that you pull out is directly reflective of the filters that you choose within the visualization. So with that, I'm not going to dive too deeply into each of the different things that are on here. There's a lot of really great information, and I'll point just towards one just because we did literally just finish it. But we just recently published new short-term rental data information. I know it's kind of a hot button topic in Vermont right now about what is the impact of Airbnbs or similar units in the state. Prior to like 2 weeks ago, we had just this 2018 through March of 2023, but we're able to include some more historic data recently, as well as this note here where we will probably be passing 12,000 short-term rental units per month for the first time now. So, you know, it's all relevant. But with that, I'll just briefly kind of go into the housing ready toolbox because this one it's a little bit less able to be digested easily. But that is just to say that the housing ready toolbox is, as I was mentioning before, really the text-based place where you can get a sense of some steps that you can take in order to make change in your local housing conditions. Something that I am personally interested in is creating some earlier steps for people to start to get activated into their local housing conditions. I'm trying to find the right words for it, but really the way as defined now is there are steps to support the formation or the support of a housing committee. There are steps for municipalities or for organizations that are looking to directly make some sorts of take some sorts of steps towards the support of affordable housing. So through changes to zoning, things that will allow easier development of housing. And then there are a few other, you know, kind of more refined tools about, well, if we are to build affordable housing, how do we price it so that it's available to the area median income and things like that. So it's kind of wide ranging in really what it is offering. And my hope is that it will, over time, as we continue to refine it and develop it, be more accessible to people that are really looking to take their first steps towards understanding how to make change in their community. So the major refinement that we've had over here so far, and this site will change visually in terms of how you navigate it shortly, but we'll have many of the same resources. The major change that we've had here is just a reorganization of this sidebar for now to make the flow a little bit more easy to understand. But starting out at the, you know, kind of think about it at like the top of the funnel. What is affordable housing? Just some baseline definitions. We're hoping to kind of continue to develop out this definition list and really turn it into a glossary. And then diving into some of the ways that you can, you know, how to use this housing needs assessment guide is how to use the community profiles to start your own housing needs assessment for your town. Brings you back to housing data. So kind of these things that just start out at the top of the funnel and then bringing it back in, diving into fair housing, steps for housing committees, some local examples, different ways that towns, counties, regional planning commissions have taken steps to start to quantify and address what their housing needs are. And then some tools that I'll actually that are more specific. So that affordable price and rental table calculator that I was talking about for how to actually think about pricing units, to some more specific things about ADUs and other things. So without diving too deeply, I mean, we can just kind of say, here's what generally what the housing committee page looks like right now, some steps towards other resources here, and then, you know, just some few first steps on ideas on how to get moving. And then just to kind of wrap up my side of things, I'll dive into briefly what the directory of affordable rental housing looks like. So this is that third page. I actually don't manage this side. It's managed by our community development team because they are working more directly with the managers of these affordable housing units. So prior, there had been an additional field that said what current vacancy rates were, but recognizing that limitation, we removed that. But instead, this gives addresses and locations as to where every unit that has had VHFA financing is located, with some filters that can, you know, narrow the fields, as well as if you click on one, it'll give more information about each specific property as well as where it is and how to contact the manager. So that's been a lot of talking. That's housing data. Any changes that are coming in the future are to make it more user-friendly, and always happy to hear some feedback on how to do that, answer any questions about concerns or clarifications on any data or just anything, really happy to make this site as usable and useful to Vermonters trying to improve housing. So thanks for sharing your time and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. And for folks on the call, you can go ahead and put either your questions in the chat or use your raise hand feature. You can find your raise hand feature. I have a different view than you all. That's where does it show up on your screen? Oh, I guess. Shoot.
Yeah, I don't have raise hand.
Reactions along the bottom, Corinne.
Okay, thank you, Carl. I'm sorry about that. With my host view, I have a different view. So reaction, if you click reactions on the bottom of your screen, you can scroll up and there's it has a little hand that says raise hand. But you're also welcome to put your questions in the chat. And I just had a quick question in the meantime. Nate, I noticed when you showed the rental, one of the rental properties, it stated no vacancies reported at this time. But I know at the beginning of the workshop you said that because it's so hard to get continuously update and get those updates from affordable housing providers, that the vacant that's no longer a resource to use to see if there's vacancies. Is that is that clear?
Yeah, I'm clicking through and it says that same message on every page. It says to contact the manager. Yeah.
Okay, so then that's kind of a different audience that might be utilizing that, but in case it is coming up in your community, that's just to say that for that portion of the housing data website, you should contact the property directly to see if there's vacancies. And of course, always get on a waiting. If you or family or friends are waiting, you should get on those waiting lists as soon as possible. And I have a couple questions, but I'm going to start with Kelsey Peterson's question here in the chat. So Kelsey's wondering with the community profiles, and feel free to, it might be helpful, Nate, to pull up the community profile so we can look at it. So Kelsey's wondering if there's a way to change the visualization. So I think you were showing us the data was like a bars, but if there is there any kind of individualization to that, or?
So within each page, you're not able to change the format of the view. I wish you could, but I would say if you were looking to get a slightly different way of viewing it, there are some pages, not every one of them, some of them that do display the information in a few different ways, whether it be bars and just a chart that shows what the numbers are. Some will have a line and a bar, depending on kind of what the best way of displaying the data is. But yeah, unfortunately, you can't change it directly in the page. However, you could download the data and just from a spreadsheet, it'll download as a CSV. You could just do it as a spreadsheet if there was a more specific one that you were trying to show. But yeah, from the question, is there one in particular that would be better as a bar, as a pie chart? Let's say.
And Nate, do you want to pull that up on your screen so that we can be looking at it? Yeah, and Kelsey, I don't know if that answered your question or if there's something that you're looking to see that you weren't seeing on the website.
So yeah, so within that, there isn't an easy way to change it, but yeah, going back down here in that box with a triangle in it, and oh, this one doesn't want you to get the data. I wonder why. That's weird. I have to look into that. I've not seen that happen before. Let's see if that happens with any other data sets. Yeah, okay. So normally that data field is highlighted, and yeah, and then just go here and click this download button, and it'll be able to be manipulated into any kind of different view, just not from within the site itself. I don't know why that prior one was not able to be downloaded. That I haven't seen that before. Let me try another one just to see. Huh. Weird. Okay. If you do try to download any data and you find that you're not able to, send me a message, because it seems like it's relatively sporadic. Here's one, for example, that has multiple views of multiple different charts that show different ways of understanding the information. It's not able to be manipulated so that you can choose which ones are there. It's just like a shortcoming of the visualization platform, but
yeah, and Nate, I don't know if you saw the chat, but I'm gonna say it out loud for the purpose of the recording.
Sure.
So Kelsey was thinking things like numbers of households and different income brackets are easier to compare between a community and another, or to the state in a pie chart percentage.
Yeah, so that was income. Yeah, that is a good note. And with that note too, I think an important thing for me to share too is that I'm not wedded to any of the things that are displayed necessarily on the site, and really and truly trying to be open to improvements. If there's something that really does not work in the way that it's displayed, it can be improved. So I'll pop my email in the chat, and happy to kind of follow up with any of these things, any ideas, because we want it to be useful to users. So
yeah,
that's a good note.
I'll put your email in the chat, and I'll give you the next question in the meantime.
Yeah.
So Carl is asking, when looking at community data or any other data, is the source and date of that source is also provided?
Yes. Yeah. So on each of the, it's a little annoying that you can't copy and paste directly out of this. I don't know why that is, but yeah. So each table will have a data note that says where the source is from, as well as a little bit of a description on what some of the data definitions might be within the larger viz. But yeah, so that'll always be stated. I'm not sure if this information pulls through when you do a data download. Here's another one. So weird. It's like, it's so random which ones are and which ones aren't. I'm glad I'm doing this right now, because I had never seen this issue ever come up. But to the prior question, it will always say where the sources are from. And then something that I'm working on updating is getting it so that the correct years are stated in each of these data definitions as well. And that's as I'm just going through an audit. But it will state, within the filters, which years are available. And the only one to note is that if, again, it's with the census and the ACS, if it's a 0 year, it's going to be census data. If it's a non-0 year, it'll be ACS. But those are both from the Census Bureau.
And then I have some questions, and of course, audience, feel free to put your questions in the chat. I should make sure that I can see all the participants. And or use the raise hand feature if you would like. One thing that's come up a few times in this beginning of the Striving for Equity project is that some and I know we've talked about this Nate, kind of like off the call. So there's some communities that are struggling with the data that is available on housing data, particularly the more rural communities. So I had there's a couple pieces to my question. So one part of the question, earlier on in this workshop, you said that there's a few different data sources, with the census data being the main one. But I think you mentioned maybe Department of Labor. What are the other data sources that
Yeah, I have a listing, but so from, I would have to stop my share and pull it up, but ultimately Department of Labor is one of them, Department of Taxes, ACS, Decennial Census, Census Bureau of, or no, Census Building Permit Survey, mouthful. Our short-term rental data is from a private source. That's the only data that I think that's the only data that we buy, because there really is not a good public record of where short-term rentals are. We use the property transfer tax. Well, that's Department of Taxes, but that's a record of all of the homes that are sold in the state. And there's something like the Department of Labor, but there are a few different ways of tracking labor statistics, and they have a few shortcomings with all of them. Mostly that they don't track farmers. They're not tracked in most Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. So that's pretty, I would say that's the broad scope of it. There's another one called the MLS, the Multiple Listing Service, that has to do with that's home buying trends. But yeah, I'd say it's those, what, in between 5 and 10, those feed, I would say 98% of the vises. If there may be one other one that I'm not thinking of, but yeah.
And so if a housing committee or someone kind of doing that more regional housing work is struggling with the accessing data, would you say that they could reach out to you?
Yeah. If there are any questions about what where something is coming from, or if it's not lining up with anything that is collected, really happy to talk through those things and just make sure that it's on the up and up, and that people can access it.
And then so Kelsey's part 2 of the question asked earlier. Is there a way to keep the community selected when you change data sets?
I wish.
So that's a
no.
no.
So that's something that's like, as we're working towards making the site better, something that I'm hoping to do is to make it so that it is easier to pull comprehensive data for one geography. However, it's just not there yet. So stay tuned. If that does happen, we will definitely publicize it. A good way to keep up to date with anything, both just kind of generally about what's going on with affordable housing in Vermont, but also specifically with housing data, is to just follow the VHFA blog. It comes out, basically it's like if you sign up, you just get an email when we make a blog post, and that's pretty much it. So it's a worthwhile, good kind of comprehensive view of, just because we're financing focused, we do have hands on many of the different things that are actually happening, the developments that are happening, the changes that are being passed down from the state to these localities. Yeah.
My next question, if a housing committee or a housing group was kind of earlier in their steps of in the Housing Ready Toolkit. And at this part where they have to do the housing needs assessment, you know, some of these, some housing committees don't have like paid municipal staff. They might be fully volunteer. Do you have any advice for those housing committees?
Yeah. So I'll go back to on the Housing Ready Toolbox. I'll share my screen again. So this, I think, to me, I think would be one of the most useful pieces that we have on the site. So if you are perhaps not able to hire someone to do a comprehensive housing needs assessment and want to just instead kind of get a sense of, you know, for yourself, or to maybe prepare something smaller in scope, we have what is here, this housing needs assessment guide. And I mentioned this prior, but functionally what this is something that was prepared by my coworker, Leslie. And it is kind of walking through each of the questions that someone might be seeking to answer through a housing needs assessment. And then, so I just clicked on one of the things. It actually will direct towards some information about how to actually quantify, how to think about those metrics. And then also pointing towards sections within housing data where you can find those specific metrics. So this is kind of like those are the two pieces together. If you have like this guide, it's like guide of how to fish, and housing data's community profiles, a bunch of fish. If you can put those together, you can, in theory, make a housing needs assessment. But that is also to say that, you know, there is nuance and it takes time, and it's a lot of work to do a housing needs assessment, which is why it's often a paid service, because it does just take time to do it right. So yeah.
And so if a town were to, it sounds like, am I wrong in understanding that? It sounds like a town could hire Vermont Housing Finance Agency to do a housing
Yeah,
needs?
potentially. So it just kind of depends on what the scope of the need is versus what the timeline is, you know, all the considerations that go into, you know, if a contract is right. But currently we're working on the statewide housing needs assessment that will be coming out sometime early next year. So that will be at least a guidepost if there isn't something, you know, if we're not able to work with a town right away, as well as some prior either local or countywide resources that are on the site. But always happy to talk and see if that is something that's right, even if it's not right now.
Great. And
Yeah.
I do, you know, I'm seeing that we're hitting the 1 o'clock mark. We did budget for an hour and a half. So for those who still have questions, feel free to stay on the call. But for those who are trying to get somewhere else, totally okay to leave. This is all going to be recorded and it will be a resource that you can access. So with that said, Carl, go ahead and ask your question.
Just a comment to expand on what Nate said. Heinsberg hired a consultant to do its first housing needs assessment. We rehired them to do an update in 2017, and then this year, 2023, the Regional Planning Commission did the update. So that's another resource. I'd say it's really hard for a town to do it on its own unless it hires someone and pays them, or hires an outside consultant. But Regional Planning Commission is another option.
Thanks, Carl. That's really helpful. And are you able to share who you hired for that?
I don't have the name offhand, but it was 2 different consultants. I have a file here. I think I can get it, and I'll put it in the chat. I don't know if they're still doing the work now, but I'll tell you who we hired.
Yeah, and I'm just seeing that Belinda asked that question, and just to say too, a part of my role here is to help collect those resources. So I'm happy to put together a list of options for that hiring housing needs assessment, or at least options that other housing committees have had success with. And I am wondering, and this is kind of putting you on the spot, so it's okay if you don't have an answer right now. Are there funding sources for towns that that are needing support with the housing needs assessment, but or is it just something that the town has to like budget for?
Yeah, I'm not sure offhand. I haven't heard of a direct funding source that's right for that, other than like there are other sources for municipalities to update other parts of things, such as bylaws and zoning, that is kind of tangential, but I'm not sure if there is one that's directly related to funding the needs assessment that I haven't heard of.
Carl, I would love to hear how Heinsberg budgeted for hiring a consultant, if you're okay sharing that.
Sure. So the consultant was John Ryan,
Mm-hmm.
and the first year we hired him, I think he was located in Brattleboro, and he's now in East Montpelier, and that was in December 2017 when he issued the second, it was updated of his first report. And he worked with another person from Chittenden County who I'm drawing, I can't remember. So they kind of shared doing it. And what we did, we actually put it in our municipal budget request to do the initial housing needs assessment. And one reason we did that is the town was seeking grant funds for housing projects, and grant funders wanted to have up-to-date housing needs assessment figures. So it was pretty important. And again, for the update in 2017, we put, I think it was $4,500 in to do the update. And then in 2022, we were going to put in, again, roughly $5,000 to update it again. And the town manager was able to work it out as a part of the work plan that the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission would perform for the town. I guess every year there might be different activities the Regional Planning Commission provides to the member communities, and they took on the work to update it. So we didn't need a special allocation. It just came from the regular budget item for working with the Regional Planning Commission. So it was a good way to lessen our request to the taxpayer and still get the updated information.
Thanks so much, Carl, for sharing. I find it's just really helpful to hear from other housing committees how they're navigating the same problems that the same challenges that so many housing committees are facing. And so that's another plug for our housing committee drop-in. That's just a discussion in informal space happening on November 16th from 5:30 to 6:30. You should come, and we can have more conversations to this nature, thinking about what some people are learning that could inform other housing committee work, and also the questions or the kind of barriers you're facing in your work. Do we have other questions for Nate while we have Nate here? We've got a rapt audience.
In the meantime, I'll just reiterate the potential benefit of working with the regional planning commissions, because that is really kind of what their main purview is in the state, is to support municipalities in their efforts to update their planning and zoning and really their thoughts about the future. So that's also something where they may be working on a regional plan that has been recently done and is in the process of being done. Something from my experience working with a lot of different municipalities and traveling through a lot of Vermont is that for the most part, the housing, the situations that are impacting housing are 90 to 95% similar amongst towns. And then that last 5% of difference of that local conditions, local history, current conditions, current wealth, whatever that might be, is really where a lot of the nuance on specific recommendations can come in. However, that 95% is able to be understood just with like a larger lens view of the data. So that is to say that undertaking a housing needs assessment doesn't necessarily need to be something that's really large in scope and is going to be highly expensive or highly time intensive. If the goal is to just have a better sense of what the data is and how it compares to the state or the county, that can be something that can be relatively streamlined if you know what it is that you're trying to look at. So that's why, like, I don't say fully, it's not something VHFA can't do that consulting. It is something that we do, but just knowing that 5% that a town may need can be beyond what we can provide in terms of time or just generally contracting. So, if it is more of something where it's like, no, we just want to see the data, it's always helpful to just ask and talk it through, because we may be able to just point you in the right direction, or kind of get you started on the process for yourself.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks for you all for your rapt ears and for your questions. Of course, feel free to continue to send questions our way. I will be making this available, the recording available in our shared drive. So there is a resource drive that we've developed as part of the Striving for Equity project. All the resources we refer to are going to be in that drive. And there's a little appendix that kind of can point to how it's organized. The other thing I should just mention is that this is a dynamic project. It's quite new. So the resources or the infrastructure of the project is being built as we move along. So thanks for your patience around that. The one big update I want to share too, where I'm moving our contacts to MailChimp. So there might be, the communication with me might just end up in a different part of your inbox. So it's just something to keep in mind. Oh, and then we have December programming that will be announced next week. So another thing to kind of keep on your radar. And the next workshop I'm really excited about is it's going to be a conversation about community engagement and municipal decision making. So a really great conversation led by the Williston senior planner, I want to say is Emily's title, but hopefully that's right because this is recorded. Or anyways, I think that's all. Thanks, Nate, again. Please be in touch, folks. Nate's email is in the chat. And class dismissed. Any last words, Nate? All right, I'm gonna end this meeting. Please reach out if you have questions. Thanks, everyone.